What's up guys, it's MJ here. So I'm getting ready to build some new raised beds and it got me thinking, what kind of vegetables do I want to prioritize to grow in them? Which vegetables are best to grow in raised beds and which ones do I want to kind of save that extra special space for? Raised garden beds are such a luxury with that deep, loose, fertile soil. You know, you've spent good money on it, and so you want to make sure that you're choosing the right vegetables to grow there, ones that will really benefit from that space and make the most of it. So for the two skinny raised planters that I already have, I've been looking for things with a relatively short time to harvest, things that don't take up too much space, and things that we will actually eat and enjoy. I try to stay away from the really big plants in that raised bed real estate because they just take up so much of the space. So things like pumpkins, I'm not gonna grow like big pumpkins in my raised beds because it's just gonna take over, or like corn, big crazy tall corn plants, squash, that kind of stuff. If I could only choose one vegetable to grow in my raised beds, it would be hands down tomatoes. First of all, they are the crown jewel of the veggie garden. Everybody looks so forward to homegrown tomatoes, and that there just is nothing like them. So that space has to be saved, even though the plants are a little bit bigger. I typically grow the vining type of tomatoes, so the indeterminate ones. Sun Gold is a hybrid indeterminate. There's Green Zebra. I've got a whole video on like top tasting tomatoes, including some really delicious heirloom tomatoes. So check that out. I'll put the link. I've grown tomatoes directly in the ground. I've grown them in big planter pots, and I have grown them in my raised planter beds, and they have done so much better in the raised beds. It's not even funny. I had one Sun Gold plant last year. I bought it as a seedling, and there's all these instructions about pruning, right? And do you prune a tomato? Do you not prune a tomato? And I decided I would prune two of the suckers out. So I had this one tomato plant, prune these two suckers out. I put one in each of the raised planter beds, and it wasn't 3 weeks before the like little sticks that I'd cut off of the main plant had rooted, well overtaken the mama plant. Those, by the end of the year, the mama plant was doing fine and normal and everything, but the ones in the raised beds, they were off to the races. There was more Sun Gold tomatoes than we could have possibly eaten. It was crazy, and it was just off 2 cuttings that I took because, I don't know, some people say you prune the suckers, so I wanted to try it out. So my suckers produced way more tomatoes in my raised beds than the mother plant did in the pot. Number 2, carrots. This is another veggie that tastes way better if you grow it. And I have grown carrots in the ground, and they're totally fine, and it is fun because they kind of grow in crazy shapes, particularly if you have rocks in your soil. But it's such a pain to dig them out, and like you always get the pitchfork and you're like splitting them, and it's just a bit of a bother. So many times I've been so excited to like pull out a carrot and like half of it will come out. I'm like, oh. Or I'll get it with a pitchfork. So raised bed is a much easier way to grow them, to tend to them, to watch out for pests, but also just to harvest them. It's more fun, certainly, to grow them, and they're a compact little crop that you can fit a lot into a raised bed without taking up too much space. Number 3 is kale. This is a veggie that you can grow in your raised beds pretty much year round in almost all climates. All but the coldest climates, you're gonna be able to grow kale through the winter in your raised bed. Now, sometimes you might need some kind of cover situation to protect from the weather, but if you're wanting to have greens pretty much year round, kale is the way to go if you're living in a colder area, and it thrives in raised beds. You can grow it in the ground too. It's perfectly fine. But I find it's easier to take care of plants in the colder weather when they're in a raised bed structure as opposed to just like kind of out in the yard. It's also nice to have kale plants raised up a little bit because they tend to be the target of some garden pests. So it's good to keep a close eye on them. So I like to have them a little bit raised up off the ground so that they're just closer for inspection. So you can keep a closer eye on them. And if they're in that part of the garden that you're always visiting, which the raised bed bit tends to be, as opposed to like a more corner of the yard, it's nice to have them close so that you're checking on them a lot and make sure they're not getting eaten. Number 4 is peppers. Like tomatoes, they love the heat. They love that warm soil that comes when you raise the soil out of the ground and let the sun beat down on the soil and just warm the whole bed up. The peppers love that. Hot peppers, bell peppers, they're gonna grow great in a raised bed. The plants aren't terribly big, like they don't tend to get as big as a tomato plant unless you're like overwintering them, which is cool. You can tuck quite a few pepper plants into a raised bed. They're gonna love the sun, they're gonna love the warm soil, and you're gonna get some really beautiful peppers from it. Another great veggie crop for the raised bed is peas. Whether you're growing the flat type of snow peas or the plump kind of snap shelling peas, they grow really well in raised beds. Peas are just generally easy to grow, but they're a fantastic vegetable for raised beds because you can get them in the ground even earlier in the springtime if you're living in a cooler area, or later into the fall, because you can extend your season so much easier with the raised beds. So definitely recommended, particularly for the shoulder seasons, is peas. Number 6 is onions. Onions are perfect in raised beds. If you're growing the big bulb style ones, it's nice for them to have some loose fertile soil to grow in. If you just want to grow scallions, like the green onion type ones, they're a nice compact crop that you're going to be able to harvest quite quickly. So think about what kind of type of onions you want. Most people don't grow big onions from seeds because you have to start like super early, but you can buy onion seedlings, you can buy onion sets, which are just baby onions that you plant, or you can plant seeds for a kind that's typically harvested as like a scallion green onion. So there's lots of different choices of onions you can grow, and all of them are very well suited to raised beds. Number 7 is lettuce. This is a perfect crop for raised beds. You can grow it year round in a surprising number of climates. If you're growing it in a raised bed, particularly if you have cover in the colder spots, but lettuce is so nice to have around to have in your salads, whether you're doing like a crisp kind of a romaine or like soft butterhead or kind of a gourmet free ones that don't make a head, they just make the leaves. There's a ton of different kinds of lettuce you can grow, and all of them are going to grow really well in raised beds, and you're going to be able to have your own fresh greens all the time, which is incredibly rewarding and just makes you feel like you have your life together. Beans are very well suited to raised beds. Some types of beans are bush beans, and so they're going to grow in a nice little compact form, which is perfect for a small space. Other types are pole beans. So these are like a vining bean, and so if you're into vertical gardening in a small space, that's perfect. Or if you want to do some kind of trellis structure, look for those ones because they can be really beautiful above your raised beds and kind of bringing your garden into 3D. I'm building my raised beds with the kind of gardenary kitchen garden revival theme. I really like her raised beds. I think they're really beautiful, and she always does these, not always, but she often does these arched metal trellises. So I've just ordered mine. I cannot wait for the big box to show up and to finally install them. And I think beans would be pretty, like the nice French green beans hanging down. And I think, you know, she's got tomatoes on this one. So pretty and just perfectly suited to the raised bed with that warmer raised soil. Number 9 is radish. They're a root crop, so they like that loose soil, but the fantastic part about radishes in the garden is that they really do not take very long. So you can get out there, get to your raised beds first thing in the springtime when you can sow the seeds, and they're one of the first things you can harvest. So they really don't take very long, and so you're seeing success in getting to harvest from your raised beds earlier than waiting for, you know, August tomato land. So it's really nice to have something that isn't lettuce or kale to harvest, and radish might be that thing for you. Spinach is number 10. It's one of those things that we're always buying at the grocery store, and it's so fantastic to replace that with something that you're growing at home. So keep it in the raised beds where if you're making a smoothie, you can just go pop right out to your close part of your garden to harvest a few leaves to put into smoothies or salads or whatever it is you're making, because it does grow quite well in raised beds, particularly again in those colder shoulder seasons. Doesn't like sun terribly. So, you know, if you're growing in a hot spot, it might not be perfectly suited for you. There are some varieties that are resistant to bolting or going to seed when it gets too hot out, which is what it always seems to want to do. So look for that if that's a concern. But spinach is another one of those things that we're always using in the kitchen that we should have close, and that really does thrive in the raised beds. There are a lot of different varieties of spinach, so I'll put in the description below some of the best that are easiest, best for beginners, least likely to bolt, all that good stuff. So look in the description for my exact recommendations for the varieties, because not all types of spinach are the same. Same thing with peppers and lettuce and all that stuff. So there's a lot to be said for choosing the right varieties. Let's go through the list of the 10 best vegetables to grow in your raised beds. Tomatoes, carrots, kale, peppers, peas, onions, lettuce, beans, radish, and spinach. These are compact crops that are going to appreciate the soil conditions in the raised beds. They're not going to take up too much space or too long to harvest them, and they're going to be so much more delicious than the ones that you can buy at the supermarket. So those are the veggies at the top of my priority list for raised beds. But I think everyone is curious what yours are. Everybody is always checking out everyone else's garden, so leave a comment and say which vegetables you've had success with raised beds, or you're glad that you put them in there. Were there veggies that that space could have been better used? What have you regretted? What are you looking forward to? Let us know what veggies you think are the best for raised beds in your experiences and plans for this year. I'll see you in the next video.